Now, if there's one thing the Galactic Council loves more than bureaucracy, it's ceremony. And if there's one thing they love more than ceremony, it's ceremonial bureaucracy with a side of diplomatic pomposity. So when High Counselor Morthan, a being who looked like what would happen if a turtle decided to major in philosophy and minor in intimidation, called for the next generation protocol, you could practically hear the collective intake of breath across 12 star systems. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. The council chambers on Nexus Prime were, to put it mildly, excessive. Crystalline walls that shifted colors based on emotional resonance. Check gravity fields individually calibrated for each species' comfort zone. Double check. Atmospheric controls so precise they could adjust humidity levels down to the individual nostril. Oh, you bet your asteroid belt they had those too. Ambassador Nethkora of the Vex Ani floated near the central dais, their translucent skin shimmering with barely contained excitement. Four arms gestured gracefully as they spoke to the assembled dignitaries, their voice carrying the musical quality that made their species natural diplomats, or really annoying dinner guests, depending on your perspective. Esteemed colleagues, Nethkora intoned, today we witness history in the making. Each species will present their most promising youth, their brightest stars, their biggest disappointments wrapped in fancy clothes, muttered General Crossack under her breath. The Korthul military representative had mandibles that clicked when she was annoyed, which was approximately always. Her chitinous exterior reflected the chamber's shifting lights like a disco ball with anger management issues. High Counselor Morthan raised one massive scaled hand, a gesture that could silence a supernova. The Next Generation Protocol represents our commitment to interspecies cooperation. These young beings will demonstrate the future of our alliance, their adaptability, The massive chamber doors burst open with a pneumatic hiss that interrupted the counselor mid-speech. Every head, tentacle, and sensory appendage in the room swiveled toward the entrance. In walked Captain Brianna Caldwell, though walked was being generous. It was more like she strode in with the confidence of someone who'd just survived her transport's life support system, deciding to take an unscheduled coffee break, somewhere between Jupiter and Proxima Centauri. Her military fatigues were rumpled, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail that had clearly given up on regulation somewhere around the third system failure, and she carried herself with the particular brand of exhausted competence that comes from keeping fragile technology functioning through sheer willpower and creative swearing. Behind her trailed two small humans who looked like they'd been packed by someone who confused diplomatic summit with weekend camping trip. The boy, Dane, clutched a worn tablet and peered around the chamber with the analytical gaze of someone mentally cataloging structural supports and emergency exits. His sister Jessa had her thumbs hooked through the straps of a backpack that looked suspiciously well-stocked for someone attending a ceremonial gathering. The silence in the chamber was so complete you could have heard a pin drop, if pins could drop in individually calibrated gravity fields, which they couldn't, but the metaphor stood. "Sorry we're late," Bree announced to the room at large, not sounding particularly sorry. Transport decided to redline 3 different systems somewhere past the asteroid belt. Had to jury-rig the navigation computer using a protein bar wrapper and some truly creative wiring. Elder Wisfin, whose moth-like features twitched with what might have been amusement or horror, leaned toward his neighbor. Did she just say protein bar wrapper? Military-grade protein bar wrapper, Jessa corrected helpfully. Mom always says civilian snacks don't have the proper tensile strength for emergency repairs. If the chamber had been quiet before, it now achieved levels of silence that physicists would have found scientifically interesting. Several alien dignitaries exchanged glances that clearly communicated variations of, "Did that small human just discuss snack food engineering in the Galactic Council chambers?" High Counselor Morthan cleared his throat, a sound like boulders having a polite disagreement. "Captain Brianna, we were not expecting your arrival for another standard hour." "Yeah, well, when your life support starts playing musical chairs with itself, you either arrive early or you arrive as freeze-dried jerky. Personally, I prefer the early option." Bree glanced around the ornate chamber, taking in the assembled alien youth in their elaborate environmental suits and ceremonial regalia. "So, this is the next generation thing, right? Kids, say hello to the nice alien dignitaries." "Hello, nice alien dignitaries," both children chorused in perfect unison, with the particular brand of politeness that suggested extensive parental coaching. Prince Yilshan of the Zephiri, a delicate being who looked like he'd been constructed from moonbeams and wishful thinking, stared at the human children from within his environmental suit. The suit itself was a masterwork of engineering, maintaining perfect atmospheric conditions while allowing the prince to participate in the ceremony without risking exposure to what his species considered harsh conditions, like normal oxygen levels. "They are so small," Prince Yilshan whispered to Lady Primnella, whose crystalline form caught and refracted the chamber's light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "And they carry their own equipment?" "Barbarian customs," Lady Primella replied, though her harmonic voice carried a note of curiosity. "Though I confess, the efficiency is intriguing." Duke Aquanthor bobbed gently in his mobile aquatic chamber, gills fluttering with what passed for laughter among his people. "Look at their coverings. So simple. No environmental controls, no ceremonial significance. Just fabric. The spark, the Lumiere offspring, whose energy-based existence required a specialized containment field, pulsed with colors that roughly translated to bemused confusion. They exist in baseline atmospheric conditions without apparent distress. Remarkable adaptation or catastrophic oversight. Meanwhile, Dane had pulled out his tablet and was quietly sketching the chamber's architecture. "Hey, Mom," he called softly. "Is it normal for ceremonial buildings to have structural stress points that obvious? Because I can see at least 3 places where the support columns don't quite line up with the weight distribution, and, Dane, honey, maybe save the engineering critique for after we figure out what we're supposed to be doing here," Bree interrupted gently. Ambassador Nethkora drifted forward, all 4 arms moving in what their species considered a welcoming gesture, but which looked to human eyes like someone conducting an invisible orchestra having a seizure. "Captain Brianna, we are delighted by your unconventional arrival. However, the protocol requires—" "Right, the protocol." Bree nodded briskly. "Let me guess. Elaborate presentation, ceremonial significance, lots of talking about the bright future of interspecies cooperation, while everyone stands around looking important." The ambassador's translucent skin shifted through several colors that probably indicated diplomatic distress. "Well, yes, but with proper reverence for—" "Great. Kids, you're up. Show them what humans bring to the table." Jessa stepped forward with the confidence of someone who'd never met a situation she couldn't handle with sufficient determination and possibly a well-placed elbow. "Hi, everyone. I'm Jessa. This is my brother Dane. We're 8 standard Earth years old, which I guess makes us the human next generation, or whatever. She looked around the chamber with the assessing gaze of someone mentally mapping escape routes and defensive positions. Nice place you've got here. Structurally questionable in some areas, but the gravity field integration is pretty clever. Dane looked up from his tablet, where he'd apparently been calculating something. The atmospheric controls are interesting too. I'm reading at least 12 different environmental zones operating simultaneously without cross-contamination. That's actually really impressive from an engineering standpoint, though I notice you've got some inefficiencies in the power distribution that could probably be optimized if we reconfigured the energy flow through the primary conduits, Jessa finished. Yeah, I saw that too. Also, your security protocols are kind of obvious if you know what to look for, which, she shrugged. Most people probably don't, so I guess it works. The alien, the Yautu dignitaries stared. Prince Yilshan's environmental suit registered a spike in his species' equivalent of adrenaline. Lady Primella's crystalline structure resonated with frequencies that sounded suspiciously like suppressed laughter. Duke Aquanthor's gills had stopped fluttering entirely. High Counselor Morthan leaned forward, his ancient eyes focusing on the human children with newfound interest. And this analysis is typical of your species' youth? Bree shrugged, the gesture of someone who'd long ago accepted that her children were simultaneously her greatest pride and her most consistent source of minor heart attacks. They're pretty standard, as human kids go. Maybe a bit more curious than most, but that's what happens when you raise them on military bases and research stations. They pick things up. Pick things up, Elder Wisfin repeated slowly, his moth-like antennae twitching, such as structural analysis and security assessment? Basic survival skills, Jessa said matter-of-factly. You always want to know if the building you're in is going to fall down, and you always want to know the best ways in and out. Mom says that's just common sense. Common sense, Ambassador Nethkora echoed faintly. Plus, Dane added, looking up from his tablet again, it's fun. Like puzzles, but with physics and real-world applications. Speaking of which, does anyone know why the atmospheric recycling system keeps making that humming noise? Because it's not supposed to do that, and if it's what I think it is, you might want to run a diagnostic on the primary filters before. An alarm chimed softly through the chamber. Nothing urgent, just a routine maintenance notification that most beings would ignore. Every human head in the room turned toward the sound. Bree's hand moved automatically toward her comm unit. Dane's fingers flew over his tablet, pulling up system diagnostics that shouldn't have been accessible to civilian devices. Jessa's posture shifted subtly, weight balanced, ready to move in any direction. The alien dignitaries noticed. How could they not? For beings raised in environments where safety meant layers of protection and careful environmental controls, the human's instant alertness to potential problems was unsettling and fascinating, and maybe just a tiny bit terrifying. Routine maintenance cycle, High Counselor Morthan announced, though his voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. Nothing of concern. Good, Bree said, relaxing. Kids, stand down. Both children immediately returned to their previous casual alertness, though Dane kept one eye on his tablet system readouts, and Jessa continued her subtle survey of the chamber's defensive positions. Remarkable, whispered Prince Yilshan to his companions. They respond to potential threats as a coordinated unit, but without apparent training protocols or communication systems. Family pack dynamics, Duke Aquanthor observed. Primitive, but effective. Or, suggested Lady Primanella, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of dawning realization, advanced beyond our understanding of advancement. Ambassador Nethcora floated back toward the central dais, all four arms now moving in what their species called the gesture of profound contemplation, or possibly the gesture of incoming migraine. The two were remarkably similar. Perhaps we should proceed with the formal presentations. Each species will demonstrate their heir's particular qualities. And so began what would later be remembered as either the most enlightening or most terrifying diplomatic ceremony in galactic history. Depending on which species you asked and how much they valued their preconceptions about civilization, proper child-rearing, and the fundamental nature of what it meant to be ready for the future. The alien youth, resplendent in their environmental suits and ceremonial garb, prepared to show the galaxy their carefully cultivated potential. The human children, meanwhile, were trying to figure out if the chamber's food dispensers worked on the same principles as camping gear, and whether anyone would mind if they tested the theory. It was going to be a very interesting day. If you've ever wondered what happens when 11 different species try to out-ceremony each other while one species shows up wearing the equivalent of hiking boots to a black-tie dinner, well, you're about to find out. And spoiler alert, it's about as graceful as a space whale doing ballet. High Counselor Mortan gestured toward the ornate presentation platform with the solemnity of someone unveiling a sacred relic. We shall begin with the traditional order. The Silmari will present their heir first. Lady Primanella approached the platform, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into patterns that were probably beautiful and definitely migraine-inducing. Her environmental suit wasn't so much worn as inhabited, a gossamer shell that maintained precise atmospheric conditions while allowing her natural luminescence to shine through. "Behold," announced her guardian, a being whose voice resonated like wind chimes having an existential crisis. The heir to the Silmari convergence, raised in the sacred crystal gardens of Silthara, trained in the harmonic arts since the moment of her first resonance. She has studied the ancient frequencies, mastered the geometric progressions of our people, and can maintain perfect atmospheric equilibrium for— The guardian paused for dramatic effect. Up to 6 standard minutes in suboptimal conditions. A collective murmur of impressed approval rippled through the alien dignitaries. 6 whole minutes in suboptimal conditions, without environmental assistance. Clearly, this was a being of remarkable resilience and training. Dane looked up from his tablet. 6 minutes? He asked his mother in a stage whisper that carried beautifully through the chamber's acoustics. Is that good? Hush, honey, Bree murmured back, though her lips twitched with barely suppressed amusement. But, Mom, we went camping on Rigel Station last month, and the atmospheric processors were down for 3 hours and we just— Dane, inside voice. Lady Primella's harmonic resonance shifted to what was probably the Silmari equivalent of a blush. The human children were looking at her with expressions of polite interest, rather than the awe her presentation was supposed to inspire. It was unsettling. Next came Duke Aquanthor, whose mobile aquatic chamber was wheeled forward by attendants wearing environmental suits that looked like they cost more than most planets' annual defense budgets. The Duke himself was visible through the transparent aluminum walls, his gill slits fluttering in precisely regulated water that had been imported directly from his homeworld's ceremonial pools. The heir to the aquatic dominions, his guardian announced with liquid pride, trained in the deepest trenches of Aquan Prime, capable of surviving. In waters with salinity variations of up to 0.003%, and able to navigate using echolocation in complete darkness for distances of up to 50 meters. More approving murmurs. 50 meters of echolocation navigation. 0.003% salinity tolerance. This was clearly a being prepared for any aquatic challenge the universe might offer. Jessa raised her hand like she was in school. Excuse me, but what happens if he needs to be somewhere that doesn't have water? The Duke's attendant blinked. Well, his species equivalent of blinking, which involved several nictitating membranes and looked mildly disturbing. He would not be expected to function in such conditions. That would be barbaric. Huh. Jessa considered this. Last summer, we went to that desert research station on Kepler, 438b, for Mom's training exercises, and we had to ration water for 2 weeks when the recyclers broke down. It was actually kind of fun once you got used to it. Duke Aquanthor pressed himself against the side of his chamber, staring at the small human with something that might have been horror or fascination. 2 weeks? With rationed water? For fun? The presentations continued with increasing elaborateness and decreasing practicality. Prince Yilshan of the Zephyri could maintain perfect meditation posture for up to 4 hours in controlled conditions. The spark could exist in pure energy form for brief periods, provided the containment field specifications remained within acceptable parameters. Each heir demonstrated remarkable abilities, within very, very specific circumstances. The human children watched with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed just how different their idea of normal childhood activities was from the rest of the galaxies. "You can only eat food from your homeworld?" Dane asked during the Mothari presentation. "But what if you're exploring somewhere new and you run out?" We learned to identify edible plants on like 6 different biospheres by the time we were 5. Mom says it's important to be adaptable. Your people just eat unknown biological matter? Elder Wisfin's antennae drooped with what looked like existential despair. "Well, you test it first," Jessa said reasonably. "There are protocols, field guides, basic toxicology screening if you have the equipment. It's not like we just grab random stuff and hope for the best." She paused. "Usually." The alien guardians were beginning to exchange glances that clearly communicated variations of, "Are we raising our children wrong?" and "Should we be concerned about human expansion into our sectors?" Finally, Ambassador Nethkora floated forward, all 4 arms moving in the gesture of diplomatic necessity. "And now, Captain Brianna, perhaps you would present your offspring in the traditional manner?" Bree looked around the chamber, taking in the elaborate presentation platforms, the environmental suits, the ceremonial lighting effects that probably cost more than her annual salary. Then she looked at her kids, who were currently sharing a protein bar and comparing notes on the structural engineering of various alien environmental suits. "Right. Okay." She cleared her throat. "Everyone, meet Dane and Jessa. They're 8. They can." She paused, suddenly realizing that listing her children's capabilities might sound less like proud parenting and more like a threat assessment. They can take care of themselves, mostly. They're curious, they're resourceful, and they have never once tried to declare war on anyone, which I consider a parenting win. The silence that followed was so complete, it had its own gravitational field. "That's it?" Prince Yilshan ventured from within his environmental suit. "What else do you need to know?" Jessa asked. "We're humans. We adapt. It's kind of our thing." "But what are your specifications?" Lady Primella's harmonic voice carried notes of genuine confusion. "Your operational parameters? Your environmental requirements?" Dane and Jessa exchanged one of those twin looks that usually meant trouble was coming. Well, Dane said slowly, we can function in atmospheric pressures from about 0.5 to 3 standard. Temperatures from, what, -40 to +50 Celsius? If we have proper gear, Jessa added. Without gear, maybe -10 to +40, depending on humidity and wind factors. We can eat most carbon-based proteins and carbohydrates, Dane continued, warming to the subject. Some silicon-based stuff if we cook it right. Most plant matter from terrestrial-type worlds, as long as we check for alkaloids and we can navigate by stars, magnetic fields, or landmark triangulation, Jessa interrupted. Work as a team or independently. Function with minimal sleep for extended periods if necessary. Solve basic mechanical problems with improvised tools. Handle medical emergencies up to and including minor surgery if we have to. And we're pretty good at making friends with people who don't speak the same language, they finished in unison. The alien dignitaries stared. Prince Yilshan's environmental suit registered stress levels that would have triggered automatic medical intervention on his homeworld. Lady Primnella's crystalline structure had gone completely transparent, which was either a sign of deep thought or complete system failure. You allow your offspring to perform surgery? General Crossack's mandibles clicked with what sounded like horrified fascination. Field medicine, Bree corrected. Basic first aid. Nothing complicated, though Jessa did have to stitch up her brother's leg last year when he had an argument with a piece of twisted metal on Europa Station. It was only 6 stitches, Dane said defensively, and I would have done it myself, but the angle was wrong. You stitched your sibling's wound? Duke Aquanthor had pressed himself so far against his chamber wall that his gills were barely visible. Without medical supervision? Mom was unconscious, Jessa explained matter-of-factly. Some kind of reaction to the station's atmospheric scrubbers. She was fine after a few hours, but Dane was bleeding, and we didn't know how long it would take to get help, so she shrugged. You do what you have to do. High Counselor Morthan leaned forward, his ancient eyes studying the human children with an expression that might have been awe or terror. How old did you say they were? 8 standard, Bree confirmed. Why? Because, Elder Wisfin whispered, his moth-like features trembling. My species doesn't consider individuals fully mature until they reach 30 standard years, and even then, we would never expect them to function without environmental support and constant supervision. 30 years, Dane blinked. What do you do for 30 years if you can't take care of yourself? Study. Learn. Prepare for the complexities of adult life under careful guidance and controlled conditions. That sounds... Jessa paused diplomatically. Really boring. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of clicks, harmonics, whistles, and what were probably several different species versions of shocked gasps. Ambassador Nethcora's skin cycled through colors so rapidly it was basically strobe lighting. General Crossack's mandibles were clicking so fast they sounded like a malfunctioning data processor. Boring. Prince Yilshan's voice carried the particular tone of someone whose worldview was experiencing rapid, unscheduled disassembly. But how do you ensure proper development? Adequate preparation? Safety protocols? Trial and error mostly, Jessa said cheerfully. Plus, Mom makes sure we don't do anything too stupid. Though our definitions of too stupid might be different from yours. Given that your offspring perform medical procedures and consume unknown biological matter, Elder Wisfin said faintly, I suspect our definitions of many things differ significantly. The spark pulsed with colors that roughly translated to existential confusion, mixed with grudging admiration. Query: do all human offspring display these adaptation capabilities, or are these specimens exceptional? They're pretty normal, actually, Bree said, which caused another round of shocked gasps. Maybe a bit more exposed to unusual situations than most, but human kids are generally pretty resilient. It's how we survive as a species. By throwing your young into dangerous situations until they adapt, or General Crossek couldn't finish the sentence. By teaching them that the universe is dangerous and unpredictable, and the best way to handle that is to be more dangerous and unpredictable than whatever they're facing, Bree said calmly. Within reason. Within reason, Ambassador Nethkora repeated in a voice that suggested their understanding of reason had just been thoroughly recalibrated. The alien heirs, still in their environmental suits and ceremonial regalia, stared at the human children with a mixture of horror, fascination, and something that might have been envy. Here they were, the carefully cultivated pride of their respective species, trained in controlled environments for specific scenarios. And these two small humans were casually discussing survival skills that none of them possessed. It was about this time that the universe decided things weren't quite interesting enough yet. A soft chime echoed through the chamber. Not the gentle maintenance notification from earlier, but something with a slightly more urgent tone. Nothing panic-inducing, just attention-getting. Every human in the room went instantly alert. Bree's hand moved to her comm unit. Dane's fingers flew to his tablet. Jessa's weight shifted to the balls of her feet. The alien dignitaries barely noticed the sound. And that, as any reasonable observer might have predicted, was when things started to get really interesting. You know that moment in disaster movies when someone says, "What could possibly go wrong?" and the universe takes it as a personal challenge? Well, nobody actually said those words, but the universe apparently decided to demonstrate the concept anyway. Because that's what the universe does when it gets bored with diplomatic ceremonies and wants to see what everyone's really made of. The soft chime escalated into a more insistent tone, joined by the subtle but unmistakable hum of emergency systems kicking into standby mode. Not full alert, not yet, but the kind of polite technological throat-clearing that suggested maybe everyone should pay attention now. Bree was already moving toward the nearest access panel, her military training overriding diplomatic protocol faster than you could say cascade failure. Dane had his tablet connected to what looked like a maintenance port that definitely wasn't supposed to be accessible to civilians. Jessa was conducting what appeared to be a casual visual sweep of the chamber, but her eyes held the focused intensity of someone mapping tactical advantages. Meanwhile, the alien dignitaries were still processing the fact that human children considered surgery and wilderness survival to be basic life skills. "Attention," came a calm, synthesized voice from the station's announcement system. "Minor technical irregularities detected in sectors 12 through 18. All personnel please remain in current locations while automated systems address the situation." This is not a drill, but it is also not an emergency. Think of it as an unscheduled maintenance opportunity. If the voice had been trying to sound reassuring, it missed the mark by roughly the distance between Earth and Alpha Centauri. Unscheduled maintenance opportunity. Duke Aquanthor's voice carried the particular pitch that indicated his species was approximately 2 minutes away from full panic. What does that mean? It means something's broken, and they don't want to scare us, Jessa said matter-of-factly, still scanning the chamber's exits. Though the fact that they mentioned it at all means it's probably more broken than they want to admit. High Counselor Morthand's massive form shifted with the sound of geological events having a disagreement. "Captain Brianna, surely you don't believe—" The lights flickered, just for a moment, but long enough for everyone to notice. More importantly, long enough for the carefully maintained environmental controls to hiccup, causing several alien heirs to gasp as their atmospheric readings fluctuated by fractions of percentages that their species considered life-threatening. "Okay," Bree announced, her voice cutting through the rising murmur of alien distress with military precision. "Kids, emergency protocols. Everyone else." She paused, looking around at the assembled dignitaries and their environmental suit-wearing heirs. "Try not to panic. Yet." Yet? Ambassador Nethkora's translucent skin had shifted to colors that probably indicated several different types of diplomatic crisis simultaneously. "Well, panicking now would be premature," Dane said, looking up from his tablet where streams of data were painting an increasingly concerning picture. "But if I'm reading these power distribution patterns correctly, we've got cascade failures building in at least 3 critical systems. And the automated repair protocols are—" He frowned. "Actually, that's weird." "What's weird?" General Crossack demanded, her mandibles clicking with barely controlled agitation. "The repair protocols are working perfectly," Jessa answered, having apparently reached the same conclusion through her own analysis methods. "Too perfectly. Like, someone programmed them to fail in a specific sequence designed to look like random system degradation." The chamber fell silent, except for the increasingly frequent hums and beeps of systems operating outside their normal parameters. Prince Yilshan's environmental suit was displaying warning indicators that were making his guardians flutter around him like very expensive, very worried butterflies. Lady Primnella's crystalline structure was resonating with stress frequencies that sounded like wind chimes having anxiety attacks. "You're suggesting this is intentional?" Elder Wisfin's antennae drooped with what was either disbelief or the insectoid equivalent of a migraine. "Not malicious," Dane clarified, still absorbed in his data streams, "but definitely planned. Someone wanted to create a controlled crisis situation." He looked up, meeting his sister's eyes with the kind of twin telepathy that had been making their mother nervous since they learned to walk. "Question is whether they still have control of it." As if summoned by his words, the chamber's gravity field wavered. Not enough to send anyone floating, but enough to make everyone's inner ear recalibrate in ways that were profoundly uncomfortable. Several alien heirs made distressed sounds that their respective species probably considered dignified, but which sounded suspiciously like whimpering to human ears. "The gravity stabilizers are fluctuating," announced the station's voice, still maintaining that aggressively calm tone that fooled absolutely no one. "Please remain seated or, well, positioned, in whatever arrangement best suits your species' skeletal structure. This is temporary and definitely not cause for concern." "Oh, it's definitely cause for concern," Bree muttered, checking the readings on her comm unit. "The question is, how much concern, and whether we have time to do anything about it." That's when things started happening fast. First, the atmospheric processors hiccuped again, this time long enough for Prince Yilshan's environmental suit to start flashing warning lights that would have been visible from orbit. His guardians immediately began emergency procedures that involved enough equipment to stock a small medical facility. Second, the chamber's main lighting system decided to demonstrate its commitment to energy conservation by switching to emergency illumination, bathing everything in the kind of red light that made even the most optimistic situations look like the opening scene of a horror movie. Third, and most importantly, The chamber's main door sealed itself with the definitive click of security protocols engaging. "Okay," said Jessa, breaking the stunned silence that followed. "Now we can panic a little." The alien heirs proceeded to demonstrate that a little was a relative concept. Prince Yilshan's stress readings spiked so high, his environmental suit began pumping emergency medication. Lady Priminella's crystalline form went completely opaque, which was apparently the Silmari equivalent of fainting. Duke Aquanthor began swimming in tight, agitated circles that made his water chamber rock ominously. The spark pulsed with colors that roughly translated to existential terror in capital letters with possibly some exclamation points. Their guardians weren't doing much better. Ambassador Nethkora was cycling through emotional colors so rapidly they were basically a living seizure warning. General Crossack's mandibles were clicking like a machine gun having mechanical difficulties. Elder Wisfin had wrapped his wings around himself in what was either a defensive posture or a very dignified way of hiding. In the midst of this carefully controlled chaos, 2 8-year-old humans were having what appeared to be a casual conversation about emergency response protocols. "Power grids definitely compromised," Dane reported, his tablet somehow still connected to systems that were supposedly secure. "But life support's on independent backup, so we've got maybe 6 hours before things get actually dangerous." "Sealed doors not a real problem," Jessa added, having conducted a brief but thorough examination of the chamber's security systems. "Emergency overrides behind that panel, but honestly, I could probably get us out through the maintenance access if needed." "How can you possibly know that?" Prince Yilshan demanded from within his increasingly agitated environmental suit. "Because maintenance access is always designed for emergency evacuation. And this station follows standard galactic construction protocols," Jessa explained patiently. "Plus, I asked about the layout when we first got here. You know, just in case." "Just in case of what?" "This," Dane and Jessa said in unison, gesturing at the current situation. High Counselor Morthun rose from his seat with the sound of tectonic plates reaching an agreement. "Captain Brianna, your offspring appear to have anticipated this situation." "They didn't anticipate it specifically," Bree corrected, though she was clearly proud of her children's preparedness. "They just have a healthy paranoia about enclosed spaces, unknown technology, and situations where adults are making important decisions without consulting the people who actually have to live with the consequences." "Living with consequences," Elder Wisfin repeated weakly. "Your children plan for living with consequences." "As opposed to planning for things to go exactly right all the time?" Jessa asked. "Because that seems like a really bad survival strategy." Before anyone could respond to that assessment, the station's announcement system crackled back to life. "Minor update on our unscheduled maintenance opportunity," the synthetic voice announced, sounding slightly less confident than before. "It appears the situation is somewhat more dynamic than initially assessed. Please continue to remain in your current locations while we recalibrate our response protocols." "Translation," Dane said cheerfully. "They've lost control of whatever they started, and now they're making it up as they go along." "How can you possibly know that?" demanded Duke Aquanthor, his aquatic chamber now rocking with enough force to cause minor tsunamis. "Because that's what people always say when they've lost control, but don't want to admit it," Jessa explained. "Adults do it all the time. They use words like dynamic and recalibrate when they mean, oh no, everything's broken and we don't know why." The chamber shuddered, not violently, but with the subtle, persistent tremor of structural systems operating outside their design parameters. Emergency lighting flickered, gravity fluctuated again, And somewhere in the walls, machinery was making sounds that machinery definitely wasn't supposed to make. And that's when something unexpected happened. The spark, the energy-based Lumeri offspring, pulsed with a pattern of colors that their species used for direct communication rather than emotional expression. Query: if humans are correct about loss of control, what are optimal survival strategies? It was the first time any of the alien heirs had directly asked the human children for advice, and it wouldn't be the last. First, we figure out what's actually broken, Dane said, accepting the question with the seriousness it deserved. Then we figure out what we can fix, what we can work around, and what we just have to endure until help arrives. And we work together, Jessa added, looking around at the assembled alien youth with an expression that somehow managed to be both reassuring and mildly challenging. Because whatever's happening, it's happening to all of us, and arguing about whose fault it is won't make the life support work any better. Prince Yilshan's environmental suit registered a decrease in his stress indicators. Lady Priminella's crystalline form began to clear, showing the first hints of transparency in several minutes. Duke Aquanthor's agitated swimming settled into more purposeful movements. The alien guardians watched in fascination as their carefully protected heirs began to listen. Really listen to two human children who treated crisis management like a particularly interesting game of problem-solving. "So," Jessa announced to the chamber at large, "who wants to help us figure out how to keep everyone alive until the adults can get their act together?" The response was not what anyone would have predicted when the day started. But then again, nothing about this day was going according to anyone's predictions. And somewhere in the station's control center, beings who had planned this test were beginning to realize they might have gotten more than they bargained for. If you've ever seen a group of adults watch children solve problems they couldn't figure out themselves, you know that particular expression of pride, bewilderment, and existential crisis all rolled into one. Now multiply that by 12 different species, add emergency lighting and malfunctioning gravity, and you've got what the Galactic Council chambers looked like for the next 2 hours. The atmospheric recycling system's not actually broken, Dane announced from where he was lying on his back under an access panel. His tablet connected two things that were definitely not designed for civilian access. It's just running a diagnostic cycle that someone programmed to look like a malfunction. And the gravity fluctuations are coming from the emergency power grid, switching between primary and backup systems, added Prince Yilshan from inside his environmental suit, which was now displaying readings he was interpreting with help from the spark's energy field analysis. Not dangerous, just uncomfortable. Lady Priminella's crystalline structure had returned to full transparency, refracting emergency lighting into patterns that were actually helpful for illuminating dark corners. The door locks are the same, safety protocol activation, but not because of actual danger. Duke Aquanthor, who had stopped his panicked swimming and was now using his echolocation to map the chamber's hidden systems, made a sound that was probably laughter. Someone wanted to test how we'd handle crisis situations. They just didn't expect us to actually handle them. The alien guardians watched in stunned silence as their precious, carefully protected heirs worked alongside two human children to systematically diagnose and address each system irregularity. What should have been a terrifying crisis had become something that looked suspiciously like fun. "You know," Jessa said, sliding out from behind another access panel with grease on her hands and satisfaction on her face, "this would have been a lot scarier if they'd actually broken something important instead of just making things look broken." That's when High Counselor Morthan cleared his throat, the sound of mountains having a polite disagreement. As it happens, he said in the tone of someone about to make a significant confession. That was rather the point. The chamber fell quiet, except for the hum of systems returning to normal operation under the combined efforts of 6 young beings who had apparently decided that diplomatic protocol was less important than functional life support. This was a test, Mortan continued, his ancient eyes taking in the scene of interspecies cooperation that had emerged from carefully orchestrated chaos. A way to observe how the next generation would respond to genuine challenges rather than ceremonial presentations. Ambassador Nethkora's skin shifted to colors that probably indicated diplomatic embarrassment mixed with grudging respect. We had concerns about humanity's rapid expansion and seemingly aggressive nature. We wanted to understand what your species was teaching its young. And, Bree asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. And we discovered that what we interpreted as aggression was actually preparation, Elder Wisfin admitted, his antennae drooping with what might have been shame. Your children don't think of crisis response as unusual because you've taught them that the universe is unpredictable, and the appropriate response to unpredictability is competence. General Crossack's mandibles clicked in what was probably her species' equivalent of rueful laughter. While we've been teaching our young to excel in perfect conditions, you've been teaching yours to create acceptable conditions wherever they find themselves. More importantly, said the spark, pulsing with colors that indicated philosophical revelation, your offspring naturally assume responsibility for group survival rather than individual preservation. Dane looked up from his tablet, where he was running final diagnostics on the now stable systems. Well, yeah. If everyone dies, you die too. Basic math. Basic math, Prince Yilshan repeated wonderingly from within his environmental suit, which was now displaying readings that indicated he was more relaxed than he'd been since arriving at the station. So, what happens now? Asked Lady Priminella, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of curiosity rather than fear. High Counselor Morthan leaned forward, his massive form somehow conveying both authority and humility. Now, we redesign our approach to preparing the next generation. Less ceremony, more practical experience. Less protection, more preparation. And, added Ambassador Nethkora, all 4 arms moving in what was either the gesture of diplomatic resolution or the gesture of complete surrender, we formally request that Captain Brianna consider a position as Director of Interspecies Youth Development. Bree blinked. You want me to teach alien kids how to survive? We want you to teach them how to think like your children think, Morthan clarified. How to see problems as puzzles to solve rather than crises to endure. I'm pretty sure they just figured that out themselves, Jessa said, gesturing at the alien heirs who were still clustered around various access panels, apparently reluctant to stop their impromptu engineering collaboration. And she was right. Prince Yilshan was asking Duke Aquanthor about echolocation applications in zero-visibility scenarios. Lady Primella was explaining crystalline resonance theory to the spark, who was pulsing with colors that indicated fascination. They'd gone from carefully segregated ceremonial presentations to genuine intellectual exchange in the space of a crisis that hadn't even been a real crisis. You know what the funny thing is? Dane said, finally closing his tablet and sitting up. We knew it was a test. Every adult in the chamber turned to stare at him. The power fluctuation patterns were too regular, Jessa explained matter-of-factly, and the security locks engaged too smoothly. Plus, Mom always told us that when adults say everything's fine, but their body language says they're nervous about something, there's usually a reason. You knew, Elder Wisfin said slowly, and you participated anyway? Sure, both, twins said simultaneously. It seemed important to you, and helping people with important things is just what you do. The silence that followed was broken by what sounded suspiciously like alien laughter. Clicks and harmonics and energy pulses that somehow combined into something universally recognizable as amusement, mixed with affection, mixed with respect. 6 months later, the Galactic Council's first interspecies youth survival camp would be held on an asteroid research station that had volunteered to serve as a controlled, challenging environment. The camp would be run by Captain Brianna Caldwell, with assistance from her twins, who had insisted that any decent survival course should include basic engineering, emergency medicine, and at least one weekend where the participants had to keep the life support working, using only improvised tools and creative problem-solving. The camp's first graduation ceremony would be notably different from traditional Galactic Council events. Less ceremony, more practical demonstrations, less environmental protection, more environmental adaptation, and absolutely no speeches about the theoretical future of interspecies cooperation. Because by that point, cooperation wouldn't be theoretical anymore. It would just be what you did when people needed help, which, as any 8-year-old human could tell you, was really just basic math.